alive that day, you know exactly where you were and exactly what you were doing when you heard the news. September 11th, 2001, America under attack. 20 years later, where are we as a country? In a special edition of Capital Tonight, we speak to survivors, Middle East experts, and the generation born after 9/11 who never knew a nation at peace. As America watched in horror, several Texans found themselves inside the World Trade Center on that fateful day. Thanks for joining us. I'm Karina Kling. They had no idea what was going to happen. I had the opportunity to sit down with one of them who survived the attack. Here's his story.
Actually, on the day of 9/11, I got a call from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. She had heard that I was in the South Tower of the World Trade Center, was working on a story, and she said to me, I'm afraid, she said, "You're an eyewitness. Your story to us is invaluable. Would you write it down?" I said, "Sure." Today I'm pretty sore from the 66th floor walk down the stairs, but unbelievably grateful to be alive. So this is what I was wearing that morning, but it was in this, which I was, basically sweating through all the way on down the stairs. Although it's been in the laundry cleaners many times, I've just hung on to it.
Did you continue to wear it?
For 15 years, I just couldn't bear to wear it. We were on the northeast corner of the 66th floor. All the breakfast dishes had been cleared away. We're all sitting there with papers. The desk is piled with papers, and I looked up as we were talking about this issue, and there in the sky, flying in our direction, way too low, was an American Airlines 767 aircraft. Just then, several things happened at once. We heard the jet engines for the first time. The plane disappeared from view, and there was a tremendous explosion that shook the room. We ran to the window and could see debris raining down, papers, pieces off the building. It was an unbelievable shower of junk. Above us, maybe 30 floors or so, we could see the building next door. One World Trade was on fire. So we headed for the exits. We headed for the emergency stairs and started heading down. And I got to about the 50th floor, and I realized my wife knew where I was, but she didn't know. She knew I was in New York, but she didn't know exactly where I was and what I was doing there. So I called home, and she answered the phone, and I said, "Look, we're in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. Something terrible has happened in the North Tower, but we're going to evacuate." And she said, "I know, I'm watching it on the Today Show. They say a plane flew into the North Tower." We were probably 35 floors above the street when there was another loud explosion. The building we were in rocked violently. The lights flickered. None of us obviously knew what would happen. We were in a windowless emergency staircase, but millions and millions of people watched it live as the United Jet flew up from the south and hit the South Tower about 6 or 7 floors above where we had been meeting not 20 minutes earlier. We finally got to the second floor, and there was lots of smoke, and you could see the debris piled up in the plaza outside. That was the first time I saw the gaping hole on the north side of 1WTC and the fire blazing out of 2WTC at just about the level we had been at maybe 30 minutes earlier. When we came up to daylight, the streets were absolutely packed. It was pandemonium. People were staring upward back to the World Trade Center site, which you could see from where we were. I basically emailed my travel agent. I said, "I can't reach my wife. Please call and relay this message. I was in 2 World Trade and saw the American Airlines jet collide with the 1 World Trade." All the emails that I sent and received that morning are in this file.
Why did you keep all of this?
So we would never forget, so we can go back through it and frankly take our kids and grandkids through it, if they had an interest.
What was the first thing you did when you saw your wife?
A very big hug. Some tears. And then she said, "Tuesday night when you were going to be home, we had an event planned for your nephew's birthday." And I said, "Right, what was that again?" "We were going to go see the professional wrestling at the Summit in Houston." And I said, "Oh, that's right." And Paulette said, well, we're going tonight. They've rescheduled it for tonight. We're going to a wrestling match the first night I'm home? She said, yeah. So we did. We went to see the professional wrestlers at the Summit that night, and it was surreal. Our son came and he had a sign talking about, a sign that said, my dad survived the towers, and the wrestlers all came out, sang the national anthem, cried like babies. Crazy. Sorry.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming?
I've probably been back to New York since that day at least 100 times. But I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget, right? I mean, it would be, shame on me if I were to lessen the power that day had on me, and to lessen the impact it had on so many other people who were less fortunate than I was, and their families. I'm a lucky man, and I know it. Every day's a gift.
Another Texan found himself under attack on September 11th, this time at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Brian Birdwell is now a state senator. Irina Diamante shares his story of survival that's still with him today.
I think we just had an airplane crash east of here. It must be the district area.
Okay.
R-14 was an American Airlines plane headed east down over the Pike, possibly toward the Pentagon.
I mean, I shouldn't be alive. I mean, the impact should have killed me.
50 temple.
There's so many things that should have killed me that day.
Delta 35.
That day was supposed to be routine for Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell.
It was a normal work day. I was the military aide to a flag officer. The normal things that happen on a normal day.
September 11, 2001, the soldier from Texas got to the Pentagon bright and early like he always did. Just before 9 a.m., one colleague got a call to immediately turn on the television.
We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't
You see that huge gaping hole in the North Tower. 5-10 minutes later, on live TV, we watched second plane, Flight 175, crashed into the South Tower.
And there is now flames coming out of that building as well.
Less than an hour later,
So when you go back to the photo here,
the nerve center of U.S. defense was under fire.
when I stepped out and went to the men's restroom, I turned left into the fourth corridor, came out. I'm 7 or 8 steps out of the restroom in the corridor, about to turn right.
352.
I think we just had an airplane crash east of here. It must be the district area.
An American Airlines Flight 77 crashed
36, I'm around. I see the smoke.
just 15 yards before him.
Delta 35.
The emotion of knowing that I'm dying, that I'm about to enter eternity, and then how I said goodbye to my wife and my son that morning was the last time I was going to see them until they joined me in eternity with the Lord. Those emotions outweigh the physical pain of being burned and the things that come with that, because of the intensity of dying the death you know you're dying.
Birdwell suffered more than 60% total body burns. Nearly half were third degree.
The pain thresholds you are dealing with in a burn unit, I pleaded for the mercy of death.
It would take 4 years for Birdwell to get to a point where his injuries couldn't be improved any further. In that time, he was honored with the Purple Heart and retired, awarded the Legion of Merit.
And you know what a miracle it is that we're still here. So
Birdwell's faith and his family support never wavered. He says his wife has lived her wedding vows with an unmatched rigor.
instead of Mel being back in Texas as a widow, I've got my pictures of my grandkids and the opportunities that we've had in life since then.
Today, Birdwell is a Republican state senator in Texas. Working in the Texas legislature's upper chamber, few may realize the physical and mental trauma he conquered just to serve. And he says there's still a lot of life to be lived.
Well, no matter our challenges and our difficulties as a nation, this is still the greatest place on God's earth. There are still men and women that serve, put on the uniform, that the majority of Americans still love this country and will still pay the price to keep her free. That's what I want Americans to remember on this day. Not just the lives that were lost that day, but those that responded to the nation's call because of that day, and that we're still, the liberties that this nation offers are still worth defending.
Okay, any unit responding to check the area of the Pentagon advise.
And as Birdwell still grapples with the pain of that day, 20 years later, a new generation of first responders is on the front lines, heeding that call.
There were 4 planes hijacked on that fateful day. The 4th was targeting Washington, D.C. when passengers on board rushed the cockpit and it crashed into the ground in Pennsylvania. We later learned terrorists were targeting the White House or the Capitol. All 44 people on board died, but that number would have almost certainly been higher if not for their actions. And while that day remains vivid in so many of our memories, there's an entire post-9/11 generation too young to know or remember. Today, 1 in 4 Americans were not alive when the attacks happened, but their lives have been shaped by that day. Our Nikki Griswold spoke with one Texas teen about how 9/11 affected his growing up.
I've just lived in the post-9/11 era my whole life, and we've been at war my whole life since.
Nick Chandler was born in December of 2001, 3 months after the deadly September 11th attacks.
Everybody has a where were you story. Oh, I remember when I watched the tower fall, my husband called me, said, watch the news, turn it on. And that's, I feel, where I learned the most about how it affected everybody. Was by hearing everybody's different perspective.
As he grew up, the many fundamental changes to society that followed 9/11 became part of his normal life.
To me, the airport has always been a maximum security place. I remember I did TSA pre-check for the first time and I didn't have to take off my shoes. And I was like, what? But I guess for a kid, not having to take off his shoes in the airport and being surprised by it shows the era that we live in.
My freshmen were not born when 9/11 happened. It's just something they've always lived with, but with very little understanding of its successes and failures, its costs and consequences. It's almost hidden in plain sight because it's just something that has always been in the background of their lives, which is not what warfare is ever supposed to be.
Chandler remembers struggling to make sense of the U.S.'s role in the war on terror.
As I was growing up and learning more about the conflict, feeling how hopeless it was, and feeling that however righteous our cause, if we were in another country, killing people's brothers, fathers, kids, that we would just be creating more enemies for life.
Most of my students are confused about why we've been fighting against a nebulous, decentralized terrorist entity for some 20 years, given the fact that there have been no successful large-scale terrorist attacks on American soil since 9/11.
While younger Americans still have varying opinions on the U.S.'s actions abroad.
I think to be critical is to be patriotic. Wanting to make your country better because you see issues in it is great.
Now, a 19-year-old college student studying history, Chandler hopes to better understand the repercussions we're still facing today.
You can't understand a situation if you don't understand the past, and you can't understand a problem if you don't understand its origins.
I think there is more awareness of the world, if for no other reason than that most conscientious young Americans are concerned about where their country is using lethal force, and that urges them to try to take these matters seriously and to learn about the rest of the world. That is a good thing in this present political climate.
Nikki Griswold, Capital Tonight.
For Muslims in America, 9/11 was a day that forever affected their community. Even as they gather for prayer, the bias against them that spiked in hate crimes after the attacks is hard to ignore, and many feel that discrimination continues to this day. Islam Musad is an imam in Central Texas. He says Muslim Americans dealt with both the horror of that day and the rise of Islamophobia.
On top of the horrific scenes that they were seeing, some of them were also being targeted, and some of them felt a fear of backlash against the Muslim communities. While anti-Muslim hate crimes have never reached the same levels as 2001,
They've never dropped back down to pre-9/11 numbers. Still to come on this special edition of Capitol Tonight, the 9/11 attacks led to America's longest war. Was the cost of 20 years in Afghanistan worth it?
We've gone 20 years without another 9/11.
And later, thousands died on 9/11. We remember some of the Texans lost that day.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Welcome back to this special edition of Capitol Tonight. Shortly after that speech from then President George W. Bush, America launched a war with Afghanistan to hunt down the individuals responsible for 9/11. That mission took a turn 10 years in when U.S. forces killed the mastermind behind the attacks, Osama bin Laden. But American troops would stay another 10 years until last month when the final troops left the country. Joining us now is one of those Americans who served in Afghanistan, Paul Miller. He's now considered an expert on national security and international relations and teaches at Georgetown University. Paul, thank you for being on the program. You were there in 2002. What was the situation like on the ground that early on? What was your role?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show and for the question. I was there in mid-2002. At the time, in retrospect, it was one of the more peaceful times in Afghanistan over the past 20 years. The Taliban had been pushed across the border. They had fallen from power. There was no organized armed resistance. I was able to walk around downtown Kabul by myself and mingle with the Afghans. And at that point, the security environment was permissive. The Afghans were very welcoming of the international presence and the American military presence. I returned again as late as 2007. Things had changed quite dramatically. And Kabul was a city that felt almost under siege by that point, much heightened security. And I understand that things continued to deteriorate in the years after that.
Why do you think then President Bush felt like it was so important to go into Afghanistan?
First, to find and kill or capture al-Qaeda's senior leadership and dismantle its infrastructure and training camps, and also to overthrow the Taliban government that had given them safe haven. That's the tricky part, is that the United States could not simply leave after killing a bunch of bad guys, because it was very clear that they would come back. Even after bin Laden was killed, al-Qaeda still existed and still exists today. And we always feared that if the United States left too early, that al-Qaeda would be able to reconstitute itself, similarly to how al-Qaeda in Iraq was able to put itself back together after the American withdrawal in 2011. And indeed, we had to re-intervene in Iraq just 3 years after that withdrawal. I fear something similar may happen this time. ISIS and al-Qaeda still exist and have safe haven in Afghanistan today after our withdrawal, just as we feared. And the situation there is about as bad as it was 20 years ago.
We've seen the financial toll, the human toll this war has taken. Was it worth it?
Well, it's been difficult as a veteran of the war. It does feel sometimes as if our efforts have been in vain, that we have betrayed the purpose that we fought for. There are some silver linings. We shouldn't take for granted that we've gone 20 years without another 9/11. And I think the fact that we kept the bad guys on the run and under pressure in Afghanistan has something to do with that. We also gave the Afghans a new life for 20 years. A new generation of Afghans grew up under a situation of relative freedom, and they can use that as a memory, a hope, and an inspiration for their future. And those are what we accomplished, and I hope that the Afghans are able to take that the best they can and work for a better future in their country.
With that being said, I mean, what do you think will be the effect of this war, especially now that the U.S. is no longer there?
I'm deeply pessimistic. I think that the risk of international terrorism is higher now than at any point in the last 20 years. I think Afghanistan has almost entirely fallen under the terror and tyranny of the Taliban. They do not respect human rights, women's rights, religious freedom, and we have no prospect of affecting that situation for the better. I know that President Biden has said he intends to speak out for women and girls in Afghanistan, I don't think that our words will do anything when we don't have military force to back that up. So the human rights situation is dramatically worse. The terrorism situation is dramatically worse. And America's standing in the world is lessened. We all remember and will never forget the images of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and the chaos that ensued. And it's been an international public humiliation for the United States. I know I said that there were some silver linings, but we have to face the fact that the withdrawal overall has been deeply bad for America, for the Afghans, and for the world.
Paul Miller, thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still ahead on this special edition of Capital Tonight, remembering the fallen, the Texans who lost their lives, and the legacies they left behind. The lives of the nearly 3,000 people who died on 9/11 will never be forgotten. A number of Texans were among them. Lieutenant Colonel Karen Wagner was a fourth-generation soldier and grew up in a military family in San Antonio. She was working at the Pentagon and was posthumously awarded a Purple Heart. Jimmy Neville Story of Katy was visiting his company's office in the World Trade Center. He was described as a doting father and grandfather. Barbara Olson was a Houston native who later became a well-known attorney and TV commentator. She was on Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. Zandra Cooper Plogger of San Antonio was on that same flight on the first leg of her honeymoon with her new husband. She left behind 2 daughters who remember her as the ultimate mom and party hostess. Jayesh Shah had just moved from Houston to New York to start a new job in the World Trade Center. He was a proud family man who left behind 3 kids. Lauren Catuzzi Grandpolis was raised in Houston and pregnant with her first child. She was returning from her grandmother's funeral when she boarded Flight 93 and was one of the passengers that retook that plane from the hijackers. Texans among the nearly 3,000 people who died that day. Gone, but never forgotten.